Thank you for joining us today on Earthfile. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. COVID-19 pandemic has not only challenged people and communities around the world, it has also hindered important talks about the future of our species and our planet. The United Nations climate talks resumed a few weeks ago after more than 1.5 years. Since the summit in Madrid in 2019, a number of worrying climate reports have been published. The latest from the World Meteorological Organization shows that the global temperature may pass the critical 1.5 degree threshold already by 2026. Now, all eyes are on Glasgow, where the next COP will hold at the end of the year. The question is, what can we expect from the negotiations? More so, can they provide the solutions we need? We'll look at these and more on today's episode of the program. So stay with us.
The presidency have done all the efforts.
With over 40 hours of extension, it was the longest COP in history, which was usually extended due to intense discussions.
We were very clear in saying that we're comfortable with moving forward with a discussion on oceans, but we are not comfortable with having a further discussion on land.
And I'm telling you, we will not accept a decision that would make reference to ocean report, but not the land report. We really can't be any clearer than that.
Many countries and companies were relying on the idea of carbon markets to meet goals to cut greenhouse gas output and help limit temperature rises to between 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Supporters of carbon markets say they can serve to lower the cost of reducing emissions and enable countries to commit to more ambitious targets. Others see them as a way to stall more aggressive action to cut emissions.
There has been a confrontation of ideas that has not produced a consensus, but has definitely enriched our knowledge and our understanding of Article 6. And we think that bringing this wealth of ideas to the next stage of the discussion will be valuable.
Closing the summit, Chile's environment minister, who was also the president of the summit, said the next generations expect more from them.
Esta ha sido la COP más larga de la historia y quiero
But clearly, it is not enough.
puesto el corazón y el esfuerzo
The world is watching and waiting for concrete and bigger solutions from
en
us.
un proceso que se basa en el acuerdo de todas las partes.
We are not satisfied. The agreements reached by the parties are not enough to urgently confront the crisis of climate change.
Pero agradezco todos los esfuerzos y las largas horas por tratar de alcanzar.
The consensus is still not there to increase ambition to the levels that we need.
Aún no están los consensos para aumentar la ambición.
Before finishing, I want to make a clear and strong call to the world to strengthen political will and accelerate climate action to the speed that the world needs. The new generations expect more from us.
Las nuevas generaciones esperan más de nosotros.
Condemnation of the outcome in Madrid was swift. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the international community had lost an important opportunity. The 2-week negotiations were being watched for signs that governments were ready to honor the 2015 Paris Agreement to combat global warming by submitting more ambitious plans to cut greenhouse gas emissions before COP26. Almost 2 years later, and with a pandemic disrupting the normal way of doing things, most world leaders are yet to fully commit to more ambitious targets. Many nations have yet to submit stronger climate action plans that were due last year under the Paris Accord, but thrown off course due to the pandemic.
Human activity is damaging our Earth. It's imperiling this brilliant jewel. The greenhouse gases that we've been pumping into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution are altering nature's precious balance, disrupting the finely tuned and fantastically complex system that is the world's climate. And the effects are now closing in. Global temperatures are rising. Last year was the hottest on record. The last decade was the hottest ever recorded. And in the past 30 years, the world has lost up to half its coral reefs. Half. We've seen wildfires in the Pennines and floods in West Lothian, all as pollution chokes our children. And if we do not act now, the science tells us these effects will become more frequent and more brutal. That we will witness a scale of global catastrophe, the likes of which the world has not seen. And quite rightly, future generations will hold us responsible.
Britain will host the COP26 climate conference in Scotland's largest city in November, originally due to be held in November 2020, and will welcome back the United States under President Joe Biden. His predecessor, Donald Trump, previously withdrew the United States from December 2015's Paris Agreement on climate change, which was adopted at the conclusion of the COP21 summit in the French capital.
It's massively important, and I think what we've seen since the new US administration has come to office is a real galvanizing of effort, commitment that's been made, including by President Biden at the G7. It's brilliant. I think what we want to see is that galvanize others, including countries who are yet to come forward with a nationally determined contribution. And I think what we also want to see is that galvanise climate finance, and I think that's really, really, really important. So no, it's great. It's really good. It's a big part of the solution, but it's a part, and we need to fit the other parts together.
Major carbon dioxide emitting nations have yet to submit their plans to cut greenhouse gases, according to a report by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which added that even with increased effort by some countries, the combined impact falls far short of what is needed to limit the effect of climate change.
Serious commitments being made by the UK, by Germany, indeed by the US. So it is being tackled. I don't think it simply comes from developed countries with pledges. I think it also comes from leveraging the private sector and ensuring that we can raise capital in a way that's sustainable. I think it also comes from growing the green economy and making sure that we have jobs that are part of that, but infrastructure that's durable and built to withstand the effects of climate change, frankly built to try and address them. I think it comes from all of those things. It's not simply a pledging moment, though that's massively important. We're very clear on that. I think it comes from how we're creative and how we're sensible and how we're imaginative around how climate finance can be raised, but also then used in the real world.
Even in the pandemic, global leaders still rate extreme weather events caused by climate change and human environmental damage as among the top 10 clear and present dangers to the world. That's according to the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2021. People around the globe appear to agree.
The reality is that we're playing far too dangerous a game, and we're refusing to see that nature has far more power than all our technology put together. We saw this with COVID, and COVID was a fairly mild disruption, and nature shut the world down just like that. Believe you me, we need to come to terms with the reality that what we're doing with nature is far, far, far too dangerous. And hopefully that realization will also come to the leading politicians in the UK as well, because they are the hosts, have to put every ounce of energy to persuade all the participants and all the other countries, and COP is a massive thing, put every ounce of energy to persuade them how urgent the situation is. The Secretary General himself has said we are far away from meeting the targets, that we're rushing headlong to a suicidal conclusion to our brigandage and attack against nature, because nature is fighting back. So the British government have to really, really emphasize that. They are the hosts, so they have the advantage to be able to really, really push it. And also sell themselves as an example. Because from all indications, Britain is well on the way to massively reducing her carbon footprint, at least where it comes to energy production and also locomotion, movement by traffic. The windmill situation in the UK is moving full steam ahead, so she can use herself as a good example as well.
Emissions reductions promised by government are still a long way from what is needed to meet the Paris goals of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and ideally to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times, the United Nations has said. but a failure by wealthy nations to deliver on long-standing climate finance pledges to help poorer, vulnerable countries shift to renewable energy and adapt to climate change impact are casting a shadow over the UN-led process. Rich nations have come under fire for not yet meeting their promise to raise $100 billion a year from 2020 to help poorer countries tackle climate change. G7 leaders were criticized for not offering a clear roadmap on how that pledge will be met at their last summit, although Germany and Canada committed fresh money.
Now, one of the biggest reasons why we haven't had a lot of progress in climate change, especially in African countries and other developing countries, is that the industrialized nations, the developed countries of which UK is part of, has not kept their promise. You know, before Copenhagen, at Copenhagen and before Paris Agreement, they promised $30 billion per annum, you know, on climate finance to developing countries. It wasn't delivered. And then they pledged $100 billion long-term finance. And again, this has not been delivered. The amount of finance that is on the table now is a tiny fraction compared to what has been promised. And so it is with deep regret that we see the UK actually cutting its ODA. ODA means Official Development Assistance. UK has been one of the leading nations around the world in supporting developing countries' development aspiration through the ODA. And now they are cutting it from 0.7 to 0.5, which means that a lot of people are going to die in developing countries. Many women are going to drop out of school. Many adaptation projects will not be delivered because of this slashing of 0.7 to 0.5. UK can step up, rather, by really making a promise that, no, we won't cut the 0.7 ODA, and that we will actually be increasing our donation and our commitment on climate finance. This will go a long way in providing the support that developing countries need to take action on climate change.
United Nations climate talks earlier in June did not produce formal decisions because of their virtual nature, with some delegates struggling with technical difficulties.
An on-site COP, I mean a COP where at least we'll have people, especially from developing countries, that are negotiating climate change on site. Because, you know, one of the key challenges now is that because of COVID-19, there are rumors and people that are pushing that everything should be virtual. But we just finished what we call the preparatory meeting before the COP last week or so. And the experience that we have is that developing country negotiators were not able to participate effectively because of a lot of internet access and network problems. And already you know that even when we used to have on-site COP, it is actually quite hard for developing countries to make their voices effectively heard because of the complexity of the negotiations. Now, but what we are discovering is that if it is actually virtual, that further diminishes the ability of developing countries to participate effectively. Now, the challenge in having an on-site COP is around vaccination. And so the UK government can work with developing countries to ensure that their delegates are fully vaccinated and that adequate preparations are made for them to come to Glasgow to physically participate in the negotiation. This will go a long way in ensuring that developing countries are able to negotiate effectively and get good deals for their continents and countries.
I think success of a summit it's judged by not just the commitments made, but the belief, if you like, in how those commitments can be realised and taken forward. And I think we have a different dynamic this year. You know, we naturally had wanted to hold COP26 last year, but in some ways the delay has allowed for more time to prepare, more understanding of how arguments can be resolved. It's changed the dynamic in respect of the US, of course, and I think it's also brought home with the new scientific information available, which is coming every day, just how urgent, how important the impact of climate change and, frankly, keeping global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees is. So, in a way, success is going to be measured by the commitment and the action that can be taken thereafter. Physical summit, I mean, that's the second part to that question. As I say, we're very committed to doing that. We see a way to do that, and we see why that is the best way to do it, and we're absolutely clear that's what we intend to do. Clearly, doing that in a way that minimises risk is what we have to do. It's all about risk mitigation, but that's absolutely the intention.
The pandemic has also thrown another spanner in the works, with many developing nations struggling to secure access to vaccines. As a conference host, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said his government is exploring with the United Nations how to provide COVID-19 vaccinations to accredited delegations who will be unable to get them otherwise. The goal of Paris Agreement is to keep temperature rise to within 2 degrees. To keep the temperature of the planet under control, the science dictates that by the second half of the century, the world should be producing less carbon than we take out of the atmosphere. Many governments around the world believe the journey is already underway. They say despite the pandemic, the direction of travel is changing.
I mean, I think what we, ahead of November, with the US, with other partners as well, with the European Union, France, Germany, are the big countries for whom this is massively important. We're looking at what can be done to bridge the divide between those large emitters and indeed to try and help address the gap towards those who are not large emitters but need the climate finance. So I think having a constructive and active and engaged and ambitious US at the table is very important, but really complementing the efforts that we're making, that the European Union's making, and that others are making. And I mean, you talked about the kind of the historical legacy of climate change. I think, we could talk about that, and people do. I think what we're all very clear on, though, is the effect it's having and will have, regardless of who contributed to what. What we're going to see is the impact. And in fact, the most vulnerable countries are the ones who will experience climate change effects most damagingly. So, in a way, that argument can be had. What's most important is the action we commit to try and address it. And I think that's what ahead of November, and indeed at November, we hope to try and make progress with.
Around 70% of the world economy has now set net zero targets, up from less than 30% when the United Kingdom took on the presidency of COP26. Reports show that clean energy like wind and solar is now the cheapest source of electricity in most countries. Many of the world's car makers are shifting to make only electric and hybrid models. Countries around the world are starting important work to protect and restore nature. Cities, states, and regions across the world are also committing to reduce emissions to zero.
It can no longer be business as usual. It is business as usual that brought us to this precipice of unstoppable and catastrophic consequences. We have to totally reorientate and start focusing. That's why we're so happy about His Royal Highness Prince Charles and the wonderful initiatives that he has been pushing. His Terracotta Initiative, which is driving massive economic policies towards greening, towards sustainability, and also what he said at the G7, that he's bringing hundreds of massive corporates together and making sure that they invest in renewables, they invest in sustainability, and a lot of this investment will go to the so-called third world countries like Nigeria. So there's a lot of encouragement, but boy oh boy, we have a long way to go.
In May, Nigeria submitted its interim updated nationally determined contribution to the UNFCCC. In it, Nigeria updated the base year for the greenhouse gases assessment from 2010 to 2018, stating that the total emissions between the years range between 247 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions in 2010 and 347 million tons in 2018. It also states that the energy sector was the largest source of the greenhouse gas emission in 2018, with 209 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent. This makes 60% of the total national emissions. This was followed by agriculture, forestry, and other land use, contributing approximately 25% of national greenhouse gases.
Where we have the biggest problem is elevating climate change in the political status, in the governance of the country. People are still thinking of climate change as something, for the Ministry of Environment or the DCC, the Department of Climate Change. But climate change poses an existential threat to the entire country. We're talking about between 25 to 50 million people that could be inundated through 0.2 sea level rise. We're talking about the slump in oil price as a result of global transition away from oil. We're talking about 32 countries saying that they will not buy oil or use diesel in their jurisdiction from 2032. We're talking about flooding, killing hundreds of thousands of people and making it difficult for our farmers to be able to reap good produce. This is an emergency situation. Nigeria is one of the countries that is suffering the fastest rate of deforestation in the world. And then, of course, you talked about the challenges associated with the herders and farmers' conflict as a result of the drying up of Lake Chad, the security implication. Nigeria needs to declare a state of climate emergency and convoke the best of the brains in the land and commission a detailed analysis of the investment plans that is required to take action on this. And I have suggested in the past that we need to design a national green growth strategy or plan that will bring together people from agriculture, from finance, from industry, from water, to come together to really design a consolidated plan, costed, that will see us making a diversification from oil and transforming our economy from fossil fuel based to a greener economy. Without this, we will wake up one day and find that nobody is willing to buy our oil. And the result on the impact on economic situation in the country will be catastrophic.
In the updated baseline projection, carbon dioxide emission is estimated to be 452 million tons by 2030, around half of those predicted in 2015. This represents a 31% increase in total emissions between 2018 and 2030. However, the federal government hopes to review the level of mitigation ambition in the 2021 NDC update.
With this revised nationally determined contribution, we'll see what comes forward. We saw the interim statement, which we welcomed. We and others have been supporting the development of that new nationally determined contribution. I think it will see a different shape to it. I think it will include more sectors of the economy, which would be great. I think it will also say a bit more, which we really want to see, about how the pathway to meeting that nationally determined contribution can be met. And I think, what we're looking for, what I think everyone's looking for, is an ambitious nationally determined contribution, but a realistic one. What we want is something that can and will be implemented with the support of partners. So I think that will be the difference, perhaps, in terms of how people see this. It's going to be something still more implementable than last time. And I think as well it will be something that donors and others can say, right, this is how we can work with Nigeria to take action forward. I think it is really, really important that that document is produced and available by the 31st of July so it can contribute to the COP. And I think there's a really important deadline point here for all of us to reflect on. I think for Nigeria to have a voice, to have a say, and to be as vocal as we really think it should be at COP26, having that NDC produced by that 31st of July deadline is paramount. And I think from there we can build and take further action.
For many African countries like Nigeria, reliable, abundant energy is the foundation for creating decent jobs and tackling climate change. Experts say achieving a clean energy transition will be the preeminent global challenge of the next half-century. An ambitious global effort to support this work in Africa, and indeed Nigeria and other emerging regions, is smart policy for the climate, for national security, and for a prosperous and inclusive global economy. For now, United Kingdom COP26 presidency has a vision for a net zero future. It is urging government to be ready to respond to the latest signs, including, of course, the International Panel on Climate Change report, which will be published later this year and will inform the discussions at COP26. That's our program for the week. Thank you for watching our inbox Earthfile at channelstv.com. is available for your comments and your questions. From me, Ayola Kasim, and the Earthfile crew here in Lagos, it's bye for now.